Hello there, dear viewers. My name is Katie Ross, and today I'm going to talk about the movement of the 80s. This refers to a time in the 1880s. Here's the key group of people, or at least some of them. They're called the Tachtigers, or the 80s, if you were to take a literal English translation. They are a Dutch social group based in Amsterdam. And in this picture we have Willem Witsen on the left. Then Willem Kloos, we're going to hear a poem from him later on. Hein Buchen, then Marit van de Valk. They drew inspiration from naturalist writers and impressionist painters. Those were two movements which were very much popular at this time also. And this movement was a reaction against modern life. In particular, they had a focus on neurosis, which was seen as bad as cancer at the time. This was basically the modern day equivalent of mental health difficulties, so it could include anything from depression or schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. It was all just called neurosis, and for women they would call it hysteria. They also were very much against what urban stress was doing to people. This was very visible when you looked at working class conditions. The living conditions were absolutely terrible, with alcoholism and prostitution rife. They were also against the formalistic mainstream literature that was being written at the time. They wanted a change. Their style was meant to express visceral and intimate emotions. So let's have a look at how that looked in painting. So here we have a painting by Claude Monet. This was completed in 1886, and he, as you can see, painted some tulip fields with a windmill in the background. Naturally, this was made after a visit to the Netherlands. You can see this style is very much with a focus on natural things. We also see here by Jan Trope from 1886 as well, called Trio Fleuri. 3 women with some flowers in the background, and as you can see, just like with the Monet piece, the style is very loose and free here. It's very different to the classical style that was popular before it. Here's 2 examples of preceding works from previous movements. On the left we have a piece from a century before this movement, from 1767, by Jean-Honoré Falgendord. Sorry about pronunciation. So we see still a person in nature, but the nature she is in, and the man actually, is very refined. It's very tame. There's 3 men. 2 men, I think. Well, anyways, their interaction with nature is very much, they are the ones who are in charge. They've built their swing there, they've built their statues there, they own this ground. It might be their garden. Whereas here on the right we have one from about 50 years later than that, from what you would call the Romantic movement. This is a piece from 1818 by Caspar David Friedrich called Wanderer Over the Sea of Fog. So you see this man is escaping into this wild, completely untamed nature with a very explorative spirit. And just to go back to what we're talking about, here is a Dutch painting from Nicolaas Bastert called Veerpont aan de Vecht. As you can see, it's so loose. This is why it's called Impressionism. You get an impression of what's going on here, but there's no really completely defined detailed forms. And just another one from Monet as well, where you can see these factories polluting the sky. That was a real worry of these people. So now I would like to talk a little bit about why there was such this fascination with nature all of a sudden. One of the biggest reasons for that is that people could see that they were so disconnected from it. Modern life was progressing so quickly that people wondered if it was almost too fast. They were so dissatisfied with life, and they could see the destruction that their continuation was doing around them. And so they looked to plants and could see some similarities with modern life. So, for example, here we have a flower which is very popular in Java, one of the places that the Dutch colonized. This is called an Amorphophallus plant, and as you can see on the left here, to take a quote from the article, which I will link in the description, it reminded one of the mauled limbs of Negro slaves. As you can see, it's really not very pretty to look at. And this is the state that the plant remains in for the majority of its life. This picture that we see on the right is when the flower blooms, which only happens for a few days, and it could be years between it blooming. When the flower does bloom, this piece in the middle of it, which smells like a rotten corpse, expels the pollen into the atmosphere, and that pollen is spread over kilometers, and it also can pollinate nearby buds that are going to bloom soon. It attracts naturally a lot of wild animals because of its stink. But yeah, the representation here is obvious. It's only beautiful for a small time, and then for the rest of its life it's awful. And to take another example, here we have Caladium. Here are the leaves, which, to take another quote from that article, displayed as though they had almost entirely been eaten away by syphilis or leprosy, deathly pale bits of flesh, veined with a red rash and embellished with scales, end quote. So yeah, as you can see, that's really obvious here. It really looks like these leaves have been dipped in blood, which again, it shows some kind of, well, it can easily be used as a comparison with the modern life. It was very obvious that there was a degeneration happening in this society. No progress was being made anymore. The Industrial Revolution was going far too fast. Flowers are what men could hold on to and be reminded of this. Now let's look at some of the poetry. On the screen, I have the English translation. I will be reading the Dutch version just because I think it's better that you can hear it in its original flow. So the first poem we have here is from Een Lente van Versen by Louis Couperus, a Dutch poet. And this was written in 1884, so the middle of the movement of the 80s. Now, here's how it goes. Gij ruktet mij vreed uit uw lokken en wierpt mij teer neer op den grond. Maar onder uw voeten bestrooiden mijn blaadjes uw eenzaam paard. En het viert u tenminste tot vreugde dat ge mij vertreden had. So yeah, obviously this is a very self-hating poem in a way. The poet compares himself to a flower who very temporarily he hopes would give the presumably beautiful girl some joy from giving her a flower, but instead she just throws it to the ground and walks all over it. So here you see a very pathetic attempt by somebody to please their crush. No pun intended. So here's the next poem we're gonna look at, which also has a focus on floral imagery. This is by Herman Gorter from 1890, so at the end of the movement of the 80s. And for this one, the English translation you see on the screen isn't that accurate, so I'll give you my own version, which if you translate it directly from the Dutch, it's a lot more blunt. So here's how it goes. Een rode roos is in mijn hand, zie hoe puur. Elk blad brandt, nu is vol vuur. Elk mijne ogen, mijn hoofd verbrandt. Which, if you directly translate it, means a red rose is in my hand. See how pure each petal burns. Now is full fire, each of my eyes, my head burning. Which I think is far more blunt and nice. It kind of gives you more of a, as the movement of the 80s wanted, more of a visceral image to really understand it. And now I would also like to take another quote from that article from before, just which explains a little bit about what Oscar Wilde thought about this whole thing, which I'm sure you all know. He thought that flowers could reflect some kind of sterile beauty. So to take the quote, the people of the 80s abhorred fertility and reproduction. The flowers they identified with had no purpose other than to be pretty and admired. Oscar Wilde said the following about this in a letter. Art is useless because its aim is simply to create a mood. It is not meant to instruct or to influence action in any way. It is superbly sterile, and the note of its pleasure is sterility. A work of art is useless as a flower is useless. A flower blossoms for its own joy. We gain a moment of joy by looking at it. That is all there is to be said about our relation to flowers, end quote. So yeah, there's really this pathetic notion that life can be compared to flowers. It's only beautiful for a little while, and then it ends. And this last poem I'm going to look at, again with lots of floral imagery, is called Avond, or Evening. It's by Willem Claude, the guy from the picture before. En here's how it goes. Nauw zichtbaar wiegen op een lichte zucht, de witte blossoms in de smerig ziet, hoe langs mijn venster nog, met rast gerucht, een enkele ultraleedvogel vliegt. En ver, daar ginds, de zachtgeleurde lucht, al perlmoer, waar ieder tint vervliet in teerheid, rust. O, wondervreemd genoeg, want alles is bijdag zo innig niet. Alle geluid dat nog van verre sprak, verstieft de wind, de wolken, alles gaat, al zacht en zachter, alles wordt zo stil. En ik weet niet hoe thans dit hart zo vaak, dat al zo moe is, altijd louder slaat, altijd maar louder en niet rusten wil. And as you can see from the English translation, this poem is interesting because everything in it seems to provoke some image of movement. However, when you look at the poem as a whole, nothing really happens. It's in a stasis. So although it feels like there's a lot of progression, in reality, they're going nowhere. And that can definitely be tied back to the way that society was viewed by these people at the time. And like I said, we've still got so much floral imagery. So to wrap up, here's another painting by Monet. Again, we see nature without any kind of sight of man at all. The movement of the 80s, and in Impressionism and Naturalist literature and painting too, was largely sparked because of such dissatisfaction with modern day life. They really were rebelling against the society that was happening around them. And what we can take from this movement is that perhaps they wanted to create some kind of reminder of man. They wanted to remind people that life doesn't last forever, and that nature can last forever. Nature can be unchanged. Whereas living in the industrial life only leads to more sadness with the alcoholism and prostitution and neurosis. All of these things are so... They just degenerate a society. So that's what the movement of the 80s really wanted to show, that man should reconnect with nature. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that you could take something from this, and if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask in the comment section. Thank you and goodbye.